Paul Vescovo, Lake County Sheriff. In 2016 budget request, we asked for an increase in salaries for deputies, as a salary survey indicated that the Clay County Sheriff's Office had one of the lowest starting salary ranges in the Kansas City metropolitan area. There was no salary increase for deputy sheriffs, and although we do have a carryover in the law enforcement tax fund of over $777,000. We are proposing to the county commission that carryover amount be used to raise deputy sheriff salaries by $2,080 a year or $1 per hour as an intermediate step in addressing these low salaries and to allow the sheriff's office to remain somewhat competitive for the hiring of law enforcement personnel.
And what would, I'm sure this is going to be part of the discussion, clearly you want that to take effect as soon as possible.
Yes, we were asking that it, proposing that it take effect March the 13th, 2016. And we're not asking for any kind of retroactive back to the first of the year.
Yeah, that was just exactly where my next question was going to be. Is that a doable schedule from the point of view of payroll? Is that something that, should we act on this and should we put it into effect? Is that achievable?
I would have to check the payroll schedule to see whether or not that is something that would be at a clean break.
So it may end up being an April 1st sort of a thing. So we need to make sure that it is doable to put that into place.
Yes.
Well, let's get things moving here. Let's make a motion now. We take the sheriff's proposal and move forward with it. And I'd like to ask staff or whoever we got to make staff to increase that $2,080 as soon as possible.
If I could have some discussion about that, then I thank the sheriff for getting back in touch with me with regard to some questions that I asked. But there's some documents that I don't understand that we've kind of consistently gone back to the mountain about, which was amount of cash carryover. When I pull our budget, the adopted cash carryover was only $10,000. But yet, there's some statement that there was nearly $750,000 in the cash carryover. That's apparently not what was in there at the time that we adopted the budget. Am I missing something on that?
No,
I just don't know where $750,000 is coming from, and we've got $10,000 was the adopted cash carryover. So somewhere, almost $1 million went somewhere else.
I can't answer your question. One of the comment I was going to make is just an unfortunate circumstance, I think, of where we are today. It's that there are many questions that are really appropriate for Dean as the budget officer, and that maybe that would be a better starting point before we put something on the agenda.
I agree, because I'm also looking at the Kansas City, Missouri webpage with regard to some of their pay and benefit information. It's not a match, which I don't understand the discrepancy there. And the other thing is, it says that there's apparently Kansas City, Missouri does things a little bit different than we do also, and that it looks like that they've got civilian careers that we have as actual officers. And then the other thing that I don't understand, these are just things that are questions that I think need to be answered. I agree with counsel, point well taken. If we have, what was it, $300,000 and some $318,000 for 130 positions. How many people do we have on road patrol?
$24 currently budgeted, Commissioner.
How much does it cost to send somebody through training through the academy?
Well, actually, the cost of the training is borne by the applicant. When they come to us, they have to be certified or be certifiable after attending an academy for Class A certification in the state. We no longer send or pay for deputies to go through a training academy. They themselves take on the cost of that burden, and then they come and apply to the sheriff's office. Now, we also spend quite a bit of money as far as continuing training for deputies, such as like taser training, DWI enforcement training, breathalyzer training, all of these things, firearms training. So that does add up.
Excuse me, does that training it sounds like some of it would probably be required by statute or other law.
That is correct. You have to be licensed by the state of Missouri in the post program before you can actually take on the duties and be sworn in as a law enforcement officer.
Do you have something similar to what I'm saying at Kansas City, where there's a certain amount that's paid when you're in training, a certain amount that you're paid when you're probationary, and a certain amount that you're paid once you become a full-time officer?
No, that's a specific Kansas City, because they actually put you can apply for to be a Kansas City police officer, go through the background, and they bear the cost of putting you through the Kansas City, Missouri Police Academy.
But you have to pay it back because they've also got a contract that says if you don't stay for 2 years, that you owe, there's clawback provision, and there's also a deduction for.
We're not actually training them. We're not actually sending them to the academy. They're actually going to academies like as the Blue Valley and Independence. They pay the money to go through that course and pass that course so that they can become certified as law enforcement officers.
But that is also required. I mean, you've got to be a certified law enforcement officer. It's required by statute before you can be out there in a patrol car.
That's correct.
Or just
In the jail or in fugitive or civil or anywhere.
So, have we done a study as to what KCPD has switched over into a civilian position as opposed to who is a commissioned officer? Because it's my understanding that a lot of the work that's done in the jail that does not require contact with officers, I'm not guilty, that's not me. There's a lot of people that they have made the decision that they want to invest in the people who are on the street in road patrols, and as a result, the people who are dealing with more paperwork and processing, and not with the population, the jail population, that they're no longer commissioned officers, they're civilian employees. Have you done a study about that comparison?
Well, we actually have civilian employees. In fact, I've increased that number of civilian employees, what we call either control center operators or civil guards within the detention officers. Now, we do still have to maintain a contingent of deputies working within the jail for the purposes of someone comes in, someone has to read them the warrant. You don't have a civilian do that. That is a law enforcement function, as well as transportation. Actually, a lot of our prisoners in the jail most of them will be transported to state facilities. I don't have civilian guards do that. Those have to be commissioned deputies, transport these people to the different correctional facility, either in Cameron or Potosi or wherever.
Would the deputies who are uniformed but maybe not at the moment either doing road patrol or in contact with the detainees, I'm assuming that that's kind of your bench that you draw on. These uniformed officers are all trained and capable of being deployed in the...
That's correct. They all have to be certified. They have all had to successfully pass a certified law enforcement academy, an academy that's certified by the state that they can train law enforcement.
Yeah, well, you said something about how that we trained them, and maybe it was just a term of art that I misunderstood. We train them, and then they leave us, and so we've borne the cost of training, but you're saying the applicant bears the cost of training. You're talking about continuing.
I'm talking as far as being hired, actually to be hired, they have had to have successfully completed a certified law enforcement training program approved by post. Now, once they arrive here, if they're hired here at the sheriff's office, there's continuing ongoing training. We will send them to different types of training depending on what assignment they have within a particular division in the sheriff's office, which is a full-service sheriff's office. So if they're working in detention, then they're going to need training on taser training. They're going to have to, how to interact with the inmates and things like that. They get specialized training just like someone who goes to fugitive apprehension or goes to civil. Each one is a little different, and there's specific training to help them carry out those duties.
If that's a reason why that some of our people are leaving us, then couldn't we also do something similar, have a proposal out there where that in exchange for them being trained and spending our time being trained, that they would have to voluntarily enter into an agreement that would say, look, here's the cost of the training, and if I don't stay with you for a couple years after I get the training, then you get to keep my payroll deduction.
Well, I don't know how we would go about that. That's a legal question.
Exactly. I mean, these are questions that I've really been combing through this, because the other thing I needed to ask is, on the $318,370 to cover 130 budgeted positions, when I start dividing that out, my question would be, does the $318,000 include everything that we pay as far as our benefits package, the CERF, the sick, the vacation, loggers, paid holiday, any additional compensation? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm not asking for it right now. It's just a question that I would need to know. And then the other question I want to know is, what do we have to do to make sure that we keep the most highly qualified road patrol people there? That's the most at-risk position. I know what my district cares a great deal about. And so what out of this $318,000, is there some different change that we can make with regard to that road patrol so that it becomes a desirable and a scalable position, and we don't lose those highly trained officers that are out there on the road at risk?
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. It's a salary issue. And as far as whether the road patrol is at more risk, yeah, they have at times a very dangerous job. But don't think that the deputies that are working in the detention center aren't at risk.
Oh, no, I agree with that.
Or those out on civil. We've had civil deputies out doing papers and get involved in a law enforcement operation. We had one several years ago, actually took a bank robber down at gunpoint. So the minute you put on that uniform and you're out there, depending on, regardless of what, division that you're working in, you're at risk. Now, granted, in field operations, you're doing that, 40 hours plus a week. I understand that. But they're all, the way to keep them is, I think, is to get the salaries up to at least where we can somewhat start to compete. I can't blame it, a deputy that's been, they usually here 3, 4, 5 years, and that he's going to leave or she's going to leave and make $10,000 more a year. You see, I've got deputies that are here 15 years or more that are only making maybe $2,000 more than a deputy that's just being brought on to the sheriff's office. It's, this is, I really look at this more, quite honestly, as a start. As a start. I think that next year's budget, we need to sit down and look over the long haul. People that have been here for years and years, a significant amount of years. How can we keep them? Because I've always felt that it takes 5 years to make what I consider a journeyman police officer. 5 years. And that seems to be where we're doing. So, I would say this would be a start in helping me retain some of these deputies. I really do.
Well, these kind of issues came up when I was serving on the appropriations, public safety appropriations in the House, and one of the issues that was brought forward, and this sounds very similar to the thoughts that were put forward in that setting, and that was our highway patrol members were leaving for municipal and other opportunities in law enforcement, in some part because of the discrepancy in pay. We ended up adjusting their pay unfortunately, it was a one-time deal, and I think you're right, there has to be an ongoing, at least, consideration of where we are at. It's, although we are government, we are competing in the marketplace for the best deputies and the best officers possible, and I think that while the pay may not be the be-all, end-all, clearly these deputies and other officers have a responsibility to be able to support their families.
Yes,
So
sir.
I think we need to be taking that into account. In addition to, as you point out, when you put on the uniform, you assume a certain degree of risk, varying according to your assignment, but risk nonetheless.
Yes, sir.
I know that, a lot of the smaller cities, you know, the towns, they hire these police officers and they, you know, they can't pay them a lot of money. And so, you know, as soon as they get them trained and everything, they're going other places. The same thing exists here, you know. Police officers is a must in our society today. And is that we have got to be competitive. We've got to keep our police officers. And it's almost, I can't pay them enough. You know, just recently, the lady just retired to keep out of the Army that in Virginia, that just got sworn in on Friday, and she was killed in a domestic dispute the next day. I mean, it's terrible, you know, and so, I mean, I support police officers as much as I can.
Well, it's kind of the opposite now. We're losing deputies to smaller agencies that pay better. I know we've had, what, 2 that have gone to Carney.
I think what I'd like to do, and I believe Commissioner Owen has a motion on the floor. I'd like to offer an amendment to that if he's.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that would be that we place this on regular agenda for next week with the idea of it going, being carried on the meeting after that. For a number of reasons. One is you've submitted this stuff. I think this is the 3rd or 4th time that you've come before us in this setting.
Yes, sir.
The other is we need to have the input of our budget officer. These figures have been kicking around that you've given us for some time, some months now, and I would like to see some advice, some feedback from the budget officer as far as how this would affect it. I would urge that be done as soon as possible, since it's been languishing, for lack of a better way to put it. We do need to come to some resolution and some agreement with this. So with that, if the commissioner is amenable, I would like to amend that to put this on the, I don't know if it really requires a motion, but certainly I would like to see this put on for regular next week, with the hope that our budget officer will be able to, if the situation allows, be able to give us his opinion on the budgetary impact and any verification for the numbers that are required. I don't know that necessarily requires
There's not a resolution in front of the commission, so I don't think it requires a motion.
Yeah, there really is.
I think we can talk about it from consensus about what you want your agenda to look like next week.
Is there, I guess the best question is there a consensus that is the way we proceed on this issue?
A consensus that we put it on regular agenda. And in the meantime, I need input from the sheriff's department as well as from our budget team here. What number are we really talking about? Are we talking 300,000? Are we talking 400,000? What portion of that is applied here? And what happened? What was reported to us from the sheriff's department as far as their carryover? That there's 700 some $1,000 versus 10,000.
I think a lot of times, Commissioner, is that, you know, our budgetary process is so cumbersome. You know, we've got different line items for different budget amounts. You know, a lot of times it gets kind of confusing, but I think what the sheriff is talking about is the law enforcement sales tax that has that kind of carryover in it. Not some of the other numbers that would be a lot lower.
Commissioner, and you have on the regular agenda here, 2016 ordinance 04 to reappropriate and revise the adopted budget, finance and administrative services, and I believe that's just to correct that disparity. It's something we noticed as well too, that in the budget, showed only about a $10,000 cash carryover when it was a much higher amount. So I believe that this is an ordinance to correct that.
So what you're saying is, what we should be doing is revisit these numbers in light of ordinance 4 that we just passed.
Yes.
And once that
Yes.
is reapplied into the budget, see where the numbers come out.
Yes, sir.
I think that's a good.
And the actual budget, the amount that we have requested, amount that we are asking is $322,759.
And I need clarification also from the sheriff's department, does that include everything that we pay with regard to benefits? I mean, I know it doesn't include things like a car, or I think we provide common sense things like your sidearm or a shotgun or something like that. I need to know the basics. Does that include serve, sick, vacation, waters, paid holiday, and additional compensation?
Sorry, we didn't get those out before the discussion.
So it's just FICA and loggers, but there's more than, if you all could be so kind as to run what you say are the numbers with regards, you've only got FICA and loggers on here, but we've also got to count sick leave, vacation, serve, paid holiday, and the other additional compensation that may be out there. And until we can compare those numbers and come up with a consensus number, these are big numbers we're talking about. And we can't put our quality law enforcement people out there and give them raises and then say, whoops, we made a math error and it was 700,000 and now it's 400,000 and now it's 800,000. I need to know from you all what you think the number is so that we can compare with our budget team and we can arrive at a consensus. So we really
Well, help anyway. I'm assuming that that's kind of a county staff responsibility, but we'll help in any way we can if we need help.
By the way, if we could, I believe the auditor may have something to add to this discussion.
Excuse the voice, it's all I've got. Carol McCaslin, Clay County Auditor. Just wanted to speak a little bit about the carryover figures. When you're in the midst of budget, your budget officer starts this process in June, and those figures are educated estimates at that time. When we do this carryover true-up after the budget is passed, after the end of the year, then those true figures can come out. The encumbrances that are no longer needed come off, and so that's why those numbers are not going to be exact. It's still going to be an educated guess, and you can go back and look at previous years and see those adjustments as well.
If we have numbers in September, October, November, for example, of what the estimated carryover is going to be, is that a true indication more than like November, December, right before our budget time? Or where's the most, October, November, December, well, by then we're seeing the trend, right?
Well, you would hope that you have a pretty good trend, but there again, depending upon what type of expenditures and capital expenditures, I mean, we see a huge push, everybody's like, oh, we need to get those in before the end of the year. So sometimes those things make and sometimes they don't. So then that, they might be carried over into the first part of the year. They'll be closing out in 2015 POs as of March 1st. So, I mean, there's always going to be this kind of adjustment period. Now, 700,000 is a huge investment, but, I'd have to go back and look at what they were in previous years for kind of a trend. And I don't know when the budget officer, what time frame that you take those revenues at that time. I don't know when, if you draw the line in November or whenever. But I'm just telling you that there's a lot of things in play at the end of the year that precipitates this carryover adjustment.
But once that number is set, then the number shouldn't go up in January or February. It should stay the same.
Well, the number has been kind of done in January. I mean, we give the information to them, to the budget team, so that they have, what the carryover numbers have shaken out to be. So, and that's why you're looking at them now to pass them.
Whatever the number is in January is what the number should be approximately in February, except for January receipts. enforcement sales tax fund.
Right,
Okay.
yeah, so I don't know, without.
Looks like our budget,
document.
our assistant county administrator is begging to say something over here.
I'm sorry, I did want to make sure that everyone was very clear on the ordinance 4 that we just reviewed on the carryover. If you look on the last page of the attached document, the $767,226.35 of carryover for the sheriff's department is going into the sheriff's department rainy day account.
Yeah, most of the large amounts are going into rainy day as well for their adjustment.
And when we started the budget process, just so that everyone is aware, the sheriff's department did have well over $700,000 in carryover. The next month, when we were trying to clean up the budget process, it was down to $10,000 carryover. What the general fund supplemented to the sheriff's office was based on a $10,000 carryover, not a $767,000 carryover.
Okay, now I'm really confused.
We supplemented the sheriff's office based on a $10,000 carryover, not a $767,000.
So what you're, if I understand it correctly, what you're saying is we took the $10,000 that was stated as carryover. We supplemented out of general revenue $700 and some thousand back into that fund.
We supplemented them more based, I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but we did supplement them more because we thought they would only have a $10,000 carryover.
And so the reason why that we put money out of general revenue into law enforcement sales tax fund, is that right?
We put more money back into the sheriff's lines to supplement what their expenses were.
And then you're saying money came back into the account that had $10,000 in it?
It could have been that purchase order encumbrances there's two different ways. Fluctuations in revenues and expenditures, as well as purchase order encumbrances, may have been released toward the end of the year, and that would have made more available cash.
So in this true-up, there were encumbrances that were released to come up with that $10,000. Then, in this true-up, does that money from general revenue come back out because money came back in?
No, it does not, because the budget has already been passed.
I'm glad we're putting this on regular because there's a lot of money floating around here. And I've got to get a real grasp on it. If we took money from encumbrances that can be unencumbered, and to do the right thing, we put money into the sheriff's budget to make him whole, and then those encumbrances never came through, then we've got to sort this out for consensus with the sheriff. I don't understand. Bottom line of it is, folks, we got $750,000. We've got $300,000 that one person says is the appropriate number. We've got maybe $400,000-ish that I'm just running some quick numbers. It seems like that's a more accurate number. I just need to know the money that we're dealing with here. That's for roads, bridges, airport, anybody. I want our road patrol officers to have more money. Of course I support public safety. It greatly impacts my district. But I also support a balanced budget. And when we're talking about such wildly different numbers here, we've got to know, because otherwise we're cheating our officers. We give them a pay raise and then all of a sudden, oh, we can't, the number was a whole lot different than we thought it was, and we can't afford it without robbing somebody else. So I'm glad it's on a regular agenda. Let's continue to talk about it, but I've got to have some more hard numbers. We can't be off hundreds of thousands of dollars when we're talking about law enforcement.
I have a question, Linda. This is a law enforcement sales tax, and that's an estimated number that comes in, right?
Yes.
So, you just estimate how much the sales tax is gonna come in for law enforcement. And what was put over there.
Brookshires availability. It really feels like what this commission needs is a report from the budget team about the impact of this. I guess I wonder if we'll try that opportunity, maybe including this as a discussion item next week, so we can make that report, assuming he will be available, as opposed to fast packing it, and I know it doesn't feel like that, but something on regular that may limit the amount of time that our budget team can respond. I just want to, I guess, throw that out from this side of the table.
I think it's the kind of thing that if, again, this is why I've been, quite honestly, harping on a little bit that we needed to get feedback, because these figures have been in our possession for some time. That's why I've been rather harping that the administrator, who is also our budget officer, get back to us and give us the information that we need to make an intelligent decision. It's my suggestion that we keep it on regular. If circumstances dictate that that staff cannot get that going, we may well want to move forward and just talk about it. And clearly, just because it's on regular agenda during work session does not mean it absolutely has to appear on the next one. So I mean, we do have the availability to take our time, but on the other hand, I think that we need to go ahead and move forward. So by placing it on regular agenda, that at least keeps it in motion. I didn't want to see it sort of begin to lag.